Okay, I was
Digging the dancing
all right, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. Ed, I'm going to ship it over to you to welcome everyone, and then we are going to get started.
Great. Listen, welcome everybody. We're really happy to see many of you back. I know you're back because last week was not only educational but a great deal of fun. So we're really happy at IRCOS to be able to present this evening's second session with Katie as we look at the universal design for learning. We're so happy to see you all. Thank you for giving up a Saturday morning again. And I'm just as excited as you all are to hear what's next. So, Katie, over to you, and thank you again for taking time to be with us.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. And last time I was here with my dear friend, Mr. DJ Swift, and he was going to join us tonight. But he reached out a couple days ago and said, I'm thinking about taking a last minute trip and taking my parents to Hawaii. And, I don't want to leave you hanging. I'm like, oh my goodness, you have to go with your parents. That's absolutely amazing. And it's so wonderful that things are starting to open up and we can start traveling again. And so right now, DJ Swift is in Hawaii. So I'm going to be trying my hand at DJ tonight. And I went back in and I look at all the requests from last week that weren't played. And I embedded videos throughout our time together today. So you still get to hear the music that you requested last week. Now, to all of you, just to share, you have access to these slides and additional resources. So access them at any time. Feel free to make a copy of them and translate them and take notes. They are yours as a resource. So as we dive into this work together, we're going to start off by kind of reviewing what we did in the last session. If you weren't able to attend it live, then maybe you've watched the recording already and maybe you haven't watched it yet, but it is available to you. Today, we're going to dive into what are the UDL guidelines and how does that align to all of the science of learning and the learning brain. And then we're also going to talk about how UDL is different from differentiated instruction because there was a couple of questions about that last week. But I also just want to check in with you and see what your questions are about last week. You've had a week to mull it over. Maybe you've had a week to incorporate that into your practice. And so as a reminder, last week we talked about the three core components of UDL. And to answer the question, what is UDL? It's really about how we approach planning, recognizing the variability of all of our learners, focusing on really firm goals, and then really having the goal of students making their own choices. Students actually like becoming more expert in their own learning. And so that's what we're going to be doing today. But I first just want to give you an opportunity to reflect on everything that we did last week. This is really an opportunity to activate background knowledge, to get our brains back in UDL mode. And what I would love for you to think about, there's bars over the presentation, okay? I can fix that. Sometimes Zoom wants to be a problem, but I can fix that. Hold on one second. I'm going to hide the video panel and I'm going to hide the floating meeting controls. Okay, hopefully it looks better. And then I'll also join the Zoom on my phone so that way I can see the chats that way. So what we're going to do here is reflect on the last webinar and what you already know about UDL, and then think about the things that you don't know yet, but that you have questions about. So what questions do you have about UDL? Now, you can certainly have conversations if you're watching this with family members or colleagues. Feel free to mute the music if it's distracting to you, but this is a song that was requested by Kim, and we're going to just take 2 minutes here and reflect and share your thoughts about what you already know about UDL and what you'd like to know in this webinar. So I'm going to kick it off here. I'm going to turn off the captions because sometimes the captions have a really tough time with the music. So I'm going to play the music and then we'll come back together in 2 minutes.
Bạn ơi hãy đến quê hương chúng tôi, ngắm mặt biển xanh xa tít chân trời, nghe sóng vỗ dạt dào biển cả, phút phi lao gió thổi trên bờ, buồm vươn cánh vượt sóng ra ngoài khơi, trong nắng hồng bừng lên sáng ngời. Miền Nam đất nước quê hương chúng tôi, có rừng dừa xanh xa tít chân trời, người thiếu nữ dạt dào tình trẻ sáng xinh tươi đáng đuổi yêu đời. Lòng trai trắng rộng lớn như biển khơi, với cánh tay dựng nên đất trời.
Okay, so I love these questions and I promise you that I'm not playing on my phone. Zoom sometimes just is really, really problematic when you're presenting your screen. And so if I put the chat up on my screen, those bars are actually the shadow from my own chat. So I'm going to monitor the chat on my phone and then I'm going to speak to you on my computer. But I love all of the different questions about how do we really help other people to realize that this is worthy of a focus area? And what I think it comes down to is there's a couple of different things. It's first understanding that not everybody is going to dive into this at the same time. And there's this theory called the diffusion of innovation that says that whenever we want to make changes, there's going to be some early adopters. And if those early adopters have success, it makes it much more safe for the early majority to begin to consider implementing. And once the early majority has success, the late majority will actually kind of follow along. And so when you're thinking about how do we get everyone to do it, just know that that will take time. And one of the best things that you can do to help other people on board is to try it, to have evidence of success, and to share that. Because all of us got into this work because we really wanted to see students become successful. And there's more to success than just knowing your academic content. It's also about being self-directed and being a problem solver and being able to work with other people. And so what you're looking at right now is, as the story goes, Pablo Picasso, who was a very famous artist, was hanging out in a cafe. And somebody saw him and recognized him and said, "Oh my gosh, you're Pablo Picasso. Oh my goodness. Will you draw something on a napkin for me?" And Picasso's like, "Yeah, sure." And as the story goes, he draws this dove. And so the person's like, "Oh, thank you so much." And Picasso says, "Oh, that's going to be $100,000. And the man says, "You just drew that in like a minute." And he said, "No, you're wrong. It took me 40 years to learn how to draw this in a minute." And I love that story. I just love that analogy of when we see people who have classrooms that it's just kids are engaged and they're involved and they're working really well together. Like sometimes it's like, I just want to do it, right? Like I want to snap my fingers and I want my class to look like that. And I love to think about this as when it becomes second nature to do it, it's because you've been practicing for a really long time. And so embrace all of the sketches that you do in your UDL practice that you have to crumble up and throw to the side. And know that this work is about growth. It's about growth for us. It's about growth for students. And it's about recognizing that the way that many of us were taught to teach by saying we're going to do this in the same way is not going to be challenging enough for some students and might not be or might be too challenging for some students. And it's really difficult to figure out who's that going to be on a given day. So the more that we can provide those flexible pathways and build that self-awareness, the more that students can take ownership of their learning. And over time, together, we can build this really expert classroom. But we're going to do this using the UDL guidelines as kind of the evidence base for the effectiveness of this work. So when we talk about the UDL guidelines, I'm going to unpack these for you. And it starts off with really understanding how the brain works when it comes to learning. There are 3 different networks of the brain. There's the affective network, there's the recognition network, and there's the strategic network. And these 3 networks are critical for learning. And so the affective network of our brain is the part of our brain that's always wondering, why am I doing this? Like, what's the point? What's the purpose? Why am I doing this? How am I going to use this? And so the affective network always needs to know, where are we going? And that requires us to set really clear goals. So one of the most important things we can do in our practice is say, this is what all of you need to know. This is what all of you need to do. This is why you need to know it, or this is why you have to be able to do it. And let's keep that goal in mind. So I like to think of the affective network of the brain as the thermostat in a heating system. And some of you are in very temperate parts of the world, and you might not have a heating system, but maybe you have a cooling system. And if you don't have either, I'm going to share how it works. There are 3 parts in a heating, ventilation, air conditioning system, which is sometimes called an HVAC. And in parts of the world where temperature fluctuates a lot, you have the same system that can both heat or cool your house. And so it all starts with the thermostat. It all starts with putting in the temperature that you want the room or the house to be. You have to set the goal. And so the brain kind of turns on when you know what the purpose is. So the whole definition of like being motivated is trying to get to a goal, having purpose to get to a goal. Human beings are incredibly goal directed. If we're hungry, we go look for food. If we're tired, we look for a comfortable place to sleep. If someone tells me that I have to solve algebraic equations, I look for manipulatives and scrap paper and videos to understand what I'm doing better. So that's the why. The affective network is like, why am I doing this? So we set the thermostat. Now, that doesn't mean that we learn anything. It just means that we're kind of turned on and we're ready to learn. Now, the next part is, what is it that I have to know in order to do this thing? So we have to recognize everything that's happening around us. This is really like the most simplistic way to think about teaching, is we're trying to present or organize information so that students learn it. They need to take it in. And that's the recognition network, right? So they're taking in this information. And I like to think about that as the burner of a heating system, that it starts kind of cooking. So we have the thermostat. This is the goal. We have the burner. It's taking in that information. But how do we know if it worked? We need something called a blower, which is like a fan that pushes out the air. We need something to express that knowledge. And that's the strategic network of the brain. And we think about that oftentimes as assessment. So I want you to think about, how do we set purpose for learning and activate the affective network of the why? How do we design teaching so that all students can make sense of that information and they understand what they need to know? And then how do we design assessments so that students can express what they know? And so when you think about it this way, an assessment is a way to measure whether or not the goal has been met. So simple. Like when you think of it that way, it's like, okay, I got this. So when we think about how that works, this leads to the UDL guidelines. Now we're going to unpack this a bit because even though we call this the guidelines, there's a lot more going on. So what you'll notice in the very top row is you see that what's happening in the brain. So on the left-hand side, you see that's the affective network of the brain. That's why am I doing this? And if we want to get students to understand why they're doing something, we go all the way to the bottom of that column. The purpose of activating the affective network is so students are purposeful and motivated. But to do that, we have to provide multiple means of engagement. What does that mean? The guidelines tell us the 9 areas that we can anticipate variability. So when you're thinking about approaching planning through the lens of UDL, okay, I know that that's going to be tricky. It's going to go away though, is right here we go, okay, I know that students are going to be different in what interests them. Okay. So how do I get them more interested given that the goal is the same? That's when you look to the checkpoints. So the checkpoints give you the evidence-based strategies, that I showed you the last time that are like, if we want to get students more engaged, we have to get them more interested. How do we get them more interested? Well, we provide them with choices and we make sure that those choices are like relevant and authentic. And then we have to minimize the actual threat of choosing what you need. So when we talk about the guidelines, we're essentially talking about the evidence-based strategies that we can use when we approach planning to ensure that we're designing instruction so that more students can be purposeful and motivated. Look at the bottom of this, resourceful and knowledgeable, and strategic and goal-directed. And so if you've ever seen the guidelines before, some people kind of bop around and they're like, I choose this one. I choose this one. It doesn't really work like that because they're actually designed in like a really scientific way. So to understand how they are designed, I'm going to show you a short video from the father of universal design for learning. This is Dr. David Rose, a retired professor from Harvard University, and he created the UDL framework. And he's going to talk about the science of how the guidelines are organized. And then we're going to do another chat alert with some fun music. And you're going to share what you learned about the guidelines from hearing him explain how they are organized and how we need to examine them as we approach planning.
I want to make a general comment about the guidelines. Typically, and in the video that you'll be seeing, we tend to go vertically, talking about perception, then language and symbols, and then comprehension. And it has a feeling of inching your way through the guidelines, through the checkpoints. But I want to talk a little bit more globally, which is to say that actually the goal of UDL is along this horizontal, the bottom of the table here, options for comprehension, for executive functions, and self-regulation. That this is where we want to end up. This is where we want kids to be. That is, that they comprehend whatever's in front of them. They have good strategies. They know what to do. Similarly, they have great executive function. They make good plans, set goals for themselves that are appropriate, and monitor their progress. And lastly, similarly in engagement, the affective domain, that they are in fact able to self-regulate. It's not that they have to be stimulated by the outside world, that they're in charge of how things interest them and what they engage in and what they're willing to put effort in. So this is the place we want to get to. And the other guidelines are in fact really part of getting there. We do need to make sure that everybody can perceive the world from which they're going to learn. And whatever is put in language and symbols, we need that to be interpretable by the individuals. But it's really to get to comprehension that we want to do that. And similarly, we certainly want every child to be able to act on the world and to be able to be skillful in things like communication, to be able to write and speak and so on and so forth. But the top of this is really to get to executive functions where they can plan a good essay or a good speech, make it, deliver it, monitor their progress, and so on. So it's to get to executive functions that these others are critical. And lastly, on multiple means of engagement, at the beginning, it's how do we recruit interest? But that's too external. We move a little higher when we say, how do the kids learn to sustain engagement and persist in spite of difficulties? But the top of that hierarchy is really, how do kids set good goals, personal goals about development for themselves? How do they cope? And how do they reflect on their own development and their own engagement? So when you think about the guidelines, certainly there are our three main principles, and there's a verticality that goes literally from the outside in. So these are things that have to do with perception on the outside. These things have to do with physical action on the outside. Things to do with how we engage from the outside. But as you move down to this final row, it's all about the kids themselves. It's internal. The kid is what's driving. So what we want to do is get to that. Students who are independent, self-directed, self-actualizing learners. So in an odd way, the guidelines go outside, in. Each of them do that. And here's where we want to end up. Thanks. I want to make...
Okay. So, really quick chat here. What is an aha moment? What is something you're thinking or wondering about the UDL guidelines after watching that video of David Rose? And as a reminder, you have access to the UDL guidelines in the link in the chat. I'll post it for you again, but take 2 minutes here. This request is from Corey. And again, as a reminder, mute the music if it's distracting.
Listen to our thoughts with illusions of someday, cast in a golden light. No dress rehearsal, this is our life. And that's where the hornet stung me.
Okay. So I have to be honest that the first time I watched that UDL guidelines video, my mind was blown. I had no idea that they were organized that way for many years of implementing UDL. And I was with you, Stephanie, that I was like, I'm going to focus on this one. And it's recognizing that ultimately, in the evolution of our UDL practice, we start by offering these choices, giving students options for what they're going to learn about or how they're going to learn it or what materials they're going to use or how they're going to share what they know. But that's really external, which means we're still doing all the work. So I worked with CAST to create this UDL progression rubric, which all of you have access to, again, in the chat. I'm like nervous to click on the chat right now because I know it will make a big gray box if I do it on my computer. So if somebody else can, please, if you can scroll up in the chat and just grab that short link for the resource document and put it in for me. Teamwork makes the dream work. Can you share the video? Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Share any of the resources, share any of the slides. Absolutely, we want to spread all of this. But when you're looking at the UDL guidelines and you see how they're organized, you also want to think about within every checkpoint, there's a continuum of kind of sharing and transferring ownership. So when you first start implementing UDL, you as an educator are going to be providing lots of the options. So if you look at emerging or beginning practice, where people are starting to give options and choices for students, what you'll notice is that the verbs are very focused on what the teacher is offering or what the teacher is allowing. We have to start there, because students have to begin to become more self-aware and to say, okay, if I'm given the option to do this or this, what's the best way for me today? What do I need to do today to learn? What materials do I need? Or how am I going to share what I've learned in a way that challenges who I am and is something that I can be proud of? But over time, what you'll notice is as we move from this emerging to this proficient, if you look at that last sentence, as students begin to build more ownership, we can start saying, I don't have to be the one to come up with all these options. You can actually think for yourselves and begin to find your own resources. You can begin to create and look for your own tools. Or you could say, a really great way for me to show you that I can do this is this. And so that's really what we want to see in classrooms, is more of a co-creation. And so we do have these really firm goals, like you need to be able to write a really good academic paper. You have to do informational writing that cites evidence. Okay, fine. But at first I might say, do you want to use a graphic organizer? Or do you want to make an outline? Or do you want to look at exemplars? But over time, I can start saying, okay, we're going to be writing. Think about what you need in order to write. Because I, as a writer, have to do that all by myself. I don't have a writing teacher anymore to tell me what I need to do to prepare an article and submit an article. So ultimately, we want students to graduate and go on to whatever life they choose, progressing towards being an expert learner, which means that they go into the world, and when they're given a goal, they start thinking about what's the best way for me to do this. Because at work, we're often not given like checklists of how we have to do things. We're just told, this is what you need to do. This is when it's due. And so that's what expert learning really is it's about the person themselves. And if during the time we have students in school, we can get them to recognize how they learn best, what they need to support their learning, how they write well, how they speak well, and they have that independently. Somebody wrote, one of the goals is that when they graduate, they don't need us. I don't need a writing teacher anymore because I know what works for me. I know how to organize writing. I know how to ask for support and peer reviews. I know the different tools that will help me. I know where to find really good exemplars to inspire me. That's what we want from students. So when you're thinking about this work, I want to give you another couple of minutes here. And as we did in the last session, I want to give you the option for a breakout room, knowing full well that this is not going to be the best way for you to reflect on your learning for all of you. So if you would like to join a breakout room, all you're going to do is change your name to include the word breakout. And the way that you do that is you click on participants in the menu, and then you change your name to include the word breakout. And then I'll know that you would love to be in a breakout, and I can very easily put you in one. If you don't change your name to include the word breakout, then you can feel free to write a reflection and share your thoughts in the chat box. Or maybe it's a good time to stretch and take a quick break. Or maybe you want to dive in and look at some of those resources like the UDL progression rubric or the UDL guidelines. So again, I am going to give you a minute here to change your name if you would value talking to colleagues in a breakout room, just to share what you've learned about the UDL guidelines. So if you'd love a conversation, change your name to breakout. If that's not the best way for you to reflect right now, just leave your name as it is. So what I'm going to do is, I know this is going to get a little funky here because I'm going to open up the breakout rooms and you're going to see this weird shadow, but I promise it'll be fast. And we're just going to see here, anyone who wants to go into a breakout, I'll put you in groups of 3, and then you're going to go in for 5 minutes and just share what you're learning. So here we go. Perfect. So if you change your mind and you decide that you want to join a breakout room later and you're not in one, certainly just let me know and I will keep my eyes on it. Okay, so I'm going to open up the breakout rooms for those of you who selected that. There we go. Those are open. Everyone else, just take a quick break, explore some of the resources, or of course, you can just listen to the music. So we'll see you back in 5.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. And I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed. My chains are gone, I've been set free. My God, my Savior has ransomed me. And like a flood, His mercy reigns. Unending love, amazing grace. praise. How sweet the sound.
Okay, everyone, about 10 more seconds, and then everybody from the breakout room is going to come back, and then we'll be ready to go. All right, everyone. So I'm so happy that all of you are back. I'm so happy that some of you found some opportunities to collaborate if that was something that you chose, and everybody else had a quick moment to explore resources or share thoughts in the chat or just listen to some music. And so the last thing I want to do today is if we look full circle at what we've done in these two different sessions. At first, we were talking about what really are the core components of universal design, and it's about embracing variability. Students have different needs, yes, but a single child's needs change. And so we always want to make sure that the scaffolds and the supports and the challenges are available to everyone. Then we talked about firm goals, that every single learner should have equitable access and opportunities for grade level learning. That doesn't mean that everyone's going to have the same exact outcomes, but we still should be given the same exact opportunities. And then we make these choices as best we can. And then we need somebody to look at the evidence, to look at the formative assessment data, and then provide us with some targeted support. And that is where differentiated instruction comes in. So when we're thinking about what if we provide all these options for students and they're not making responsible choices yet, and then we're not seeing them learn at high levels, the answer to that is really, well, we're also going to differentiate instruction. So I want to take a step back for a moment and talk about the value of expert learning. That differentiated instruction, as it's basically explained in the research, is that when teachers differentiate the content for kids, the process of learning for kids, or the product that kids create. The teacher is the one that's making decisions for the student. Now, imagine if classrooms only used differentiated instruction. So I look at essentially student outcome data from previous years, and then I put students in groups within my class. And I say, that's the accelerated group, and this is the group that needs learning support, and this is the group that are language learners, and I'm going to give them different things all the time. What they're missing there is the opportunity to become more expert in their learning. So what we want to do is we want to do both. We want to approach planning by saying, I know I have some students who will have some language support needs. I know I have some students who will have some other support needs. I know I have some students who will be ready for more challenge. I want to make sure those pathways are available to everyone because I want to give every learner the opportunity to self-reflect, to look at the options available and begin to think about, what do I need? But then I need to look at, well, how's the learning going? And if there are some students that are not making progress, I need to pull them for a small group. I need to give them a little bit more guidance. I need to challenge them a little bit more. And so universal design is how I create the structure and the pathways so students can become more self-aware, students can take the initiative and take different pathways, and students can become more self-directed. Then as an educator, I'm going to look at the formative assessment data that students produce. And then I'm going to do what Carol Tomlinson, the mother of differentiated instruction, always says, is flexible grouping and regrouping. So I'm not just going to say, I'm going to pull all of my students who have disabilities. I'm going to say, I'm going to pull the 5 students who did not make progress here, who don't yet know the thing they need to know, or who can't yet do the thing they need to do, so I can provide them with more support. So I first am going to give you an analogy that's kind of adorable, and that you can share with your colleagues in a meeting. And then I'm going to show you an actual lesson and how you can approach it through the lens of UDL, and then also differentiate instruction for students who need more support and or who need more challenge. So here in the United States, there's a very, very famous vlogger. That's what they call them, vloggers, when people just put lots of videos together. And he's an acting principal. His name is Jerry Brooks. And he's throwing this fun little party called a differentiation party. Now, the thing that's really confusing is that differentiated instruction uses the word differentiation, and universal design for learning uses the word differentiation. So a lot of people go, well, those are the same things. But what I want you to recognize is the universal design is what comes first and what is provided to everyone. So you think about the variability, but you don't say, oh, nope, only you can have this, only you can have this. It's really like, I know that some students might need graphic organizers and some students might need the audio, and so I'm going to provide that to everyone. So what I'm going to ask you in this video, I'm going to jump ahead to show you the questions. Jerry Brooks in this video is talking about throwing a differentiation party, but he kind of goes back and forth between UDL and differentiated instruction. So I want you to listen very closely, and I want you to think about when he transitions from, I'm planning this party, I'm going to provide all these options, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. But then there's a point where he starts labeling people. He labels his guests. And then they don't have a choice at all. So listen for it. It's so subtle, but this is a fun activity or a fun game to play with your colleagues. So again, what you're listening for here is it's a 2-minute video. He's talking about throwing a fun party, but then there's a spot in the video where he kind of pivots and he labels his guests. And if you were the guest, you no longer have a choice. Okay, see if you can hear it. And then once I tell you what it is, if you missed it, you're going to go, oh my gosh. But this is why it's so hard to distinguish between UDL and DI, because it's really about who is actually making the decision. Okay, so here we go. We're going to watch this video. I'll put on the captions, and then you're going to come back to this.
I've just come from my favorite store, the Dollar Tree, and I have some suggestions for a party if you would like to have some educators over to your house this summer. They got some great ideas. They got these pineapple cups, these coconut cups. You could have a Hawaiian theme party, but I have an even better suggestion that's going to blow your mind. You can get these great cups at the Dollar Tree, and I know what you're thinking. That's just a red Solo cup. Let me show you something. Boom. They have a different size. Wait, one more time. Boom. Differentiation party. You can meet the needs of all your party goers. Some people just need a regular sized drink. Some people don't need that much to drink. Some people need a big old drink. You can meet the needs of all your party goers with these great red Solo cup from the Dollar Tree. Think about all the possibilities at your differentiation party. You can differentiate the food. You could have some wings, some barbecue wings, a little bit spicy. For those that don't like spicy, you could have some honey barbecue wings. For those that need some extra spice, you could have some of them 5-alarm Tabasco wings. You could differentiate the heat in your wings. You could have some meatballs, and you could meet the needs of those that don't eat red meat by having turkey balls. And you can meet your party goers' needs by having some tofu balls for those that are vegetarians. You can even differentiate your dip. You can make one of them 7-layer dips with the refried beans and the salsa and the onions and cheeses. You could differentiate and make a 6-layer dip, maybe leave out the onions. Then you could make an 8-layer dip, maybe add some extra festive cheese. You could even differentiate the time of your party. You could have your party from 7 to 9, invite all the fun people from 7 to 9, but you could actually invite the wild, crazy people from 6 to 9 because they can handle some extra time. Then you could just invite the fun people, a little bit boring, that can't handle a big old long party. You could do them from 8 to 9. You could even differentiate the time of your party. I'm telling you, there's a lot of things you can do at your differentiation party, starting out with these great cups from the Dollar Trees. Go out, you get you some. You're going to be the talk of all the teachers at your differentiation party.
Okay, so I know that that video is very silly, but I really want you to think about, where does he transition from embracing variability and making sure there's lots of options to suddenly saying, I'm going to decide what these people are going to do. They don't have the chance to pick. So see if you can figure out when that is. And if you're not comfortable throwing it in the chat, that's okay. Just think. At the end of this 2 minutes, we'll discuss it a little bit more. But I have some prompts here to kind of lead you to the right answer. First of all, what data did he use to make the decisions? Consider how the guests would feel if they really didn't have the option. And then once you can pinpoint where he differentiated for the guests, how could he have universally designed that instead? So 2 minutes here. I can't wait to see what you come up with.
Just before our love got lost, you said, I am as constant as a northern star. And I said, constantly in the darkness, where's that at? If you want me, I'll be in the bar, on the back of a cartoon coaster, in the blue TV screen light. I drew a map of Canada, oh Canada, with your face sketched on it twice. Oh, you're in my blood like holy wine. It tastes so bitter and so sweet. Oh, I could drink a case of you, darling, and I would still be on my feet. Oh, I would still be on my feet. I am a lonely painter. I live in a box of paints. I'm frightened by the devil.
Okay, you're all too good. Turn on those captions. Too good, I'm telling you. So it's very difficult to pinpoint because there is a lot of recognition of guests' needs. So when he says, like, I want to make sure that I have meatballs, and then he makes a joke, I want to make sure I have turkey balls, I want to make sure I have tofu balls, but he doesn't say that I can't have the tofu balls and I do eat meat. And so, like, that's why it's really subtle, in all honesty, because, like, I am thinking about in a class where I know that I have language learners, I'm going to provide access to translation tools for translanguaging. I'm going to provide access to sentence stems. I'm going to provide access to visuals, but other people can use them. If I know I have students who are really accelerated, I might provide access to really challenging problems, but I'm going to provide them to everyone. Where he then slips is like, they're not fun. They're only coming from 7 to 8. They're really fun. They're coming, and there's no choice anymore. And so that is what differentiated instruction is. It's when the teacher creates groups of students and gives them different experiences. The experience that you give to one group is not offered to the other groups. And that is a very appropriate and evidence-based instructional method when it is used in addition to universal design. So when we think about, like, how could he have done it differently? He certainly could have said, I'm having a party. It's going to be from 6 until 9. I would love everyone to come for at least an hour and, like, think about how you feel tonight and know that there's, like, absolutely no judgment based on when you come. But if it would help to make a decision, if you come earlier, the food is going to be plentiful and hot. And if you come later, it's probably going to be much rowdier, much louder. There's not going to be as much food left, but it's almost easier to blend in when everything's kind of moving along. So, like, what do you want to do? What do you want to need? Or what do you need? Now, again, I'm not advocating for using universal design for learning without differentiated instruction. It's just that when we approach planning by saying, I want every kid tomorrow to have the opportunity to reflect and think and make choices. So when I'm planning instruction, I'm saying, okay, what really are the firm goals? And then I say, based on the variability of my class, what might be the barriers? So if I say, what is it that everyone really has to do? Well, they have to have a good time at my party. Okay, so how are they going to have a good time at the party? Oh, I'm going to make my meatballs. I have amazing meatballs. Well, would anyone be prevented from eating? Oh, yeah, kind of. I'll make sure I have some turkey and some tofu as well. So what I'm doing is I'm creating the pathways. But then once I see how the party is going, I might say, those 4 are getting a little bit rowdy. I want to like kind of pull them over and like see like, it seems like you're getting kind of fired up. How's it going? Why don't you guys all play, basketball for just like 10 minutes because you seem to be getting a little bit kind of too physical over here, and then come back, right? So it makes sense to do both of them. So I'm going to show you what this looks like academically using a curriculum called Eureka Math, which is also known as Engage New York. So it's a very, very well-known math program here in the United States. And every lesson starts with fluency activities where students practice their math fluency. And then it goes to a mini lesson where the teacher is providing explicit instruction. And then it goes to kind of an application problem where students practice. And then there's a problem set. Now, you can universally design any curriculum just by really approaching it through the lens of universal design. So when I look at that curriculum, I first say, gosh, the standard, the firm goal for this lesson, which you can access in that link, is that all students will be able to count by multiples of 6 using number decomposition. That's the firm goal. Everyone has to do it. So I first say, well, one barrier is they probably aren't super interested in learning to count by 6s. That might be fun for some students, but I know that some students, it's going to be really hard to get their interest being like, it's so cool to count by 6. So I want to create a little activator. And when I was little, there were things that were called penny candy stores. And I know that not all students like candy, and I know that not all cultures all have the same kind of concept of like a treat. So I would start off with students and I would say, imagine that you could go to a store and your favorite snack was only a penny. What would you have in that store? Would it be a hot Cheeto? Would it be a French fry? Would it be an almond? Would it be a piece of candy? So we take like 30 seconds and kind of activate our brains. And then I say, imagine that you went into the store and you were so excited because you heard that it was a penny store. So you get 13 pennies in your hand and you're all excited because you're going to go in and you're going to buy 13 maybe pieces of candy, maybe licorice sticks, maybe, some delicious salty nut. And when you get up to the cash register, the person says, oh, those are 6 cents each. But I have 13 of them. How do I get that number? What do you think I should do? How do we figure out how much money we need? So I want you to brainstorm, what could you do here? And so I've done this with students. There's the sentence stems, and it's basically so I'd start asking, saying, well, what could you do? And someone's like, well, you could put all the candy back. I'm like, yes, you could. Let's put that up as an option. Let's list all of our options. Now, ultimately, what I'm trying to get them to is one of the options is to actually use number bonds using a make 10 strategy. And so I'm going to use this lesson and I'm going to say to students, okay, listen, keep that in mind. Keep your favorite treat in mind. And I'm going to show you how to do this using make 10, using number decomposition. And I am going to tell you right now that this is not the only way. You came up with a lot of awesome ways. You're such great problem solvers. this is a way and you need to know this way because I want you to know that it's an option. It just helps us make more sense of numbers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little bit of modeling and I'm going to show them how to do it. Like, this is how I get to 12. This is how I get to 18. Now, while I'm doing that, I can still provide students with options and choices. So I can give them the option to sit, or if they're feeling like really antsy or they're feeling tired and they're starting to slide down in their seat, they can stand. I can allow them to take notes, either by like writing in a notebook, or maybe they're going to take notes digitally, like on an iPad. I can certainly record my instruction. So I could set up an iPad facing me, not facing the kids. But that way, if anyone forgets it or they're absent, I can post it again. So if someone says, I don't remember what you did, I say, oh, no problem. Here's the video that you can watch. And then I'm also going to do some chat alerts. So the younger the student, the more times I stop and put on a timer for 2 minutes. And I say, during this 2 minutes, you have 3 options. You can summarize what I did with a partner. That's a turn and talk. You can write down what I did in your notes, or you can ask me a question. And then I can go around and check in with them. Just that is allowing them to think about like what I really need. Now here is where you're going to see it get a little bit more universally designed. So I've already shown students how to do this with 12 and how to do this with 18. And I'm willing to keep going, but I can predict at this point, some of the students have this down pretty good. Some have it in their sleep and they just want to go further. And then some students are like, I still don't understand how you get to 12. That's okay. So this is really fun. So I'm going to say to students, okay, listen, there are a couple of different ways that you can continue to practice. I'm going to give you 15 minutes. And in that 15 minutes, if you're thinking that it would be valuable to ask me questions or you want to see me model as the numbers get higher, you're going to stay with me. Another option is that you could watch this video that explains the same thing, but sometimes it's better to hear it from someone else. And so you could maybe share a video from Khan Academy. Eureka Math actually has a gentleman who makes these cute little videos for each lesson. Maybe you have software where they can practice it. But the thing that's really important is, even though there's a website called Zern, which actually mimics Eureka, sorry, is that I don't care if they get the right answer as much as they get, excuse me, as much as they get the right answer using that strategy. 5 seconds here. So when I say to students, listen, you're going to pick which of these you think you need. But just so we're clear, when that 15 minutes is up, you're all going to answer the application project. And I don't actually care if you got the right answer as much as what your strategy is. My goodness, I'm like choking here. I didn't even eat anything. So it's really important that students know what they are accountable for. So when I say for 15 minutes, you're going to choose how you're going to learn more about this, and then know that I'm going to give you a practice problem. And when you're doing that practice problem, I can still give you options and choices. Like I can allow you to use words or modeling or pictures. You can make a flip grid. But again, I need to know that you can do this using number decomposition. So knowing that you're going to have to answer a problem just like that, doing this strategy, now make your decision. Do you want to stay with me? Do you want to watch the video? Or do you want to play on this kind of more gamified version? But I want you to actually do the work on paper. So everyone makes their choice. It's universally designed. Now, people say, what if they choose wrong? There's no bad choice here. Okay, so they spend 15 minutes practicing math. Like, I'm okay with that. But like, again, you see that it's like loose. I want you to think about what is a good way for you to learn this. Now, here's the practice problem, okay? What is the strategy? Explain the strategy, or just show me the strategy, okay? Now, here's where I'm going to differentiate instruction. I'm going to create groups of students. Those who definitely are able to articulate the strategy. Those who are so far beyond that strategy that like they're doing really amazing things. And then those students who didn't get the strategy yet. The first group I'm going to pull is the students that didn't get the strategy yet. And I group and regroup so often that no one has any idea why I'm pulling any group. I just say, okay, everyone, these are the three groups, and groups 1 and 2, you're going to go start actually doing all of those math problems. They have the strategy. They can go do it independently. Now, I could give them some choices, like, do you want to do it on a whiteboard? Do you want to do it on paper? At that point, I wouldn't even mind if they work together because I know they can do it independently. But I need to pull the group of students who did not get that problem correct or who did not use that strategy because I need more time with them. And so they're going to be with me, and I'm going to be like, okay, so let's start over. Like, what's the first step? Okay, everybody, what's the first step? A lot of repeating, right? And then when they kind of have the strategy, I'm like, now you all work together and you work on 2 of those practice problems. I'm going to go meet with another group and then I'm going to come back. I check in with the group who's got it. And I'm just like, okay, let's see if we can do this with a higher number. Okay, now I'm going to work with that other group while they're going and being like, okay, I want you to tell me what the strategy is if you had like 137 and a half. Figure it out. I'll be back, right? So I am differentiating instruction, but I'm doing that in addition to universal design for learning. And then what do I do at the end? When we're done with that lesson, this is the most important thing, is like, what choices did you make that you think you made really good choices? And what would you do differently the next time? So it's like, I'm minimizing the threat of like, okay, you made a choice that maybe wasn't the best for your learning, but there's something really beautiful about recognizing that. And I'm going to pull the small groups anyway. So it's not like I'm letting kids get really far without learning, but just think about that classroom as every day students have opportunities to self-reflect, to make some choices, but I'm going to use data to also differentiate instruction. And when I'm checking in with small groups, I can certainly give them feedback and coaching about like, okay, so you see how we did this? Next time, maybe you should choose to do it this way because that might be really effective for you. And then you come back and say, let's take 5 minutes and talk about what we learned about ourselves, what we learned about our choices. And over time, they start to internalize this. So 2 minutes here. How did viewing that math lesson, and you can see the full lesson if you're interested in the link that I shared with you, how did that help you to see how UDL and differentiated instruction are best friends and they work together in inclusive classrooms? 2 minutes. Alrighty. Sorry about that little choking episode there. But so, in the last session, again, we talked about those core components of universal design. We embrace the variability, we focus on the goals, and we always make sure that we're valuing student expert learning. Students trying things out, reflecting, being self aware, being self directed. Knowing that until you really learn more about how you learn, many of your decisions are going to be less effective, I guess you could say. Is that like it took me a while to kind of figure out what I need to do to really focus. It took me a while to figure out like the best way to prepare to sit down and write something when I have a deadline. And we just have to celebrate that growth. And again, with the differentiated instruction piece, it's really a both and, is that like I'm not going to say, okay, make your choices and then I'm going to check in with you at the end of the week, because then you could have gone too far without making a lot of growth. But this is like, because there's options and choices, students can be more independent, and that allows me to pull smaller groups. And that also is like a nice blended learning model. If you do any work with blended learning, there's something called station rotation. And so I always love to like universally design 2 stations and then have 1 station be with me so I can differentiate instruction in that station. And I just continually group and regroup based on the evidence that I have. So, once students begin to make more effective decisions, they are going to end up regrouping a lot. Because I'm not saying I'm going to pull all the students who have disabilities. I'm saying I'm going to pull all the students who didn't get that problem right. And as students become more aware of their needs, they tend to begin to make more growth. So it's like I'm pulling kids that have never been pulled in a group before. And it's like, okay, so let's talk about your strategy. And I always try to get them connected and then moving on. So please, please, please know that this work is about growth. But hopefully you're able to see like the very subtle distinction between universal design for learning, something that happens before to create pathways. All pathways are truly universal, meaning any student can choose them. But then we also want to be data driven enough that we then are saying, oh no, I'm going to need to pull this small group. So I want to see if you have any questions that I can answer before you go off on your beautiful, beautiful day, wherever you are in the world. And so again, please let me know. I'm going to peek on the chat here. But I love that Liz just put in a comment that said, you're giving students opportunities to develop that self-reflectiveness on not only what they learned, but essentially how they learned and whether or not the choices they made help them to learn at higher levels. And there's something like so cool about that, because students will say like, oh, I chose to watch that video and now I'm like, oh, I wish I had just stayed with you. And I'm like, well, and that doesn't always mean you need to come with me. It just means that like maybe next time try it out and see if it works better. And there's no right and there's no wrong. It's just like understanding and evolution. And over time, you also build confidence that way, because you're like, now I'm not guessing what's going to work for me. I know that like that's what I need to be successful. So any questions at all? Ed, do you have any questions or thoughts?
Well, no, I don't have any questions other than for the group to ask if they would agree with me that when people perform or when they make presentations, one of the rules is what you'd really like when you finish is for people to want more. And I want to know if I'm alone thinking that it would be really good to get more from you in an EARCOS conference session or even more Zoom sessions. Really, I think this has been enlightening and really clarifying some thinking for all of us. And just really want to thank you. And I'm not going to say anything else tonight other than to thank everybody for coming and leave the room open for questions and discussions with you. But we're really so honored to really have found out about you and then to be able to have you with us these last two Fridays or Saturday morning. So thank you so much, Katie. And
No,
for
thank
all the
you
rest
so
of you,
much.
this is great stuff, and the kids deserve to have master teachers thinking about classroom instruction through these lenses. So
Yeah,
thank you so
and
much.
what
I'll
I
leave the
love
rest to
about
all
this.
the rest of you to chat.
No, absolutely. What did I teach? So I was a high school English teacher for 3 years, and then I was a seventh grade teacher English for 10 years, and I've been a graduate instructor now for about 10 years. So I teach academic writing at the graduate level, and then I also teach courses at University of Pennsylvania focused on universal design for learning. So like I really honestly think of myself as a teacher first. So when people ask me what I do for a living, I never say I'm a consultant. I'm like, "Oh, I'm a teacher." And they'll say, "What do you teach?" I'm like, "Oh, I teach adults now." And then, like, ultimately, I might get down to, well, yeah, I do some consulting, but I really just think of it as like classrooms everywhere. And the really cool thing about this is just the evolution of this. There's no ceiling on it. Every time I get feedback, I have these like new ideas of things I'm going to try. Some of them are terrible. Some of them are okay, and some of them are great. And I think that that's the best that we can do is we figure out what works for us. But when you have the evidence of what students have created, that's how you're going to move your colleagues. So I wouldn't put that pressure on yourself yet to say, how do I get everyone to do it? Is you get to a place where you're confident enough to say, this is how I used to do this assignment, and this is how I do it now. And like, look at the student feedback. Look at their reflections. Look at the work they created. And everyone's going to say, hey, I want that. Oh, why don't you come and check out my classroom sometime? Or maybe read this article, or let's start a book club. And you plant these little seeds everywhere, and poof, you're going to have a garden. So thank you so much for starting this journey with me. I'll see if you have any other questions here. So yes, absolutely dive into the resource document. It is you and yours forever. Share it. Share the resources, share the slides, use the slides with your own colleagues. This is really about helping people feel more prepared to meet the needs of all kids. And when we put some of that on the kids, they're more prepared to meet their own needs, which is less work for us in the long run. So thank you so much. I hope you have an absolutely beautiful evening. We're going to have Mark Anthony just kind of sing us out of here. But again, thank you for joining me. I hope you have a beautiful weekend, and I hope to see you again soon.